Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the first provocative lecture of the 2012-2013 series. We're very excited to offer you this opportunity, even if it's standing room only, to think. We challenge you. We bring you provoking thoughts to instill in you that questioning mind. And so I challenge you today to think about our speakers' comments today and do your extra credit. So I wanted to let you know that this effort really takes a team, and I am proud to be the chair of a department where everybody pitches in. So I have to thank people like Jack Estel, Matt Holian. Everyone literally helps find the speakers and organize their trip here. It would not be possible for one person to do it all. Today we have a speaker that was brought to us by Warren Gibson. And Warren, I'm going to let you come on up in a moment, not just yet, to come up and introduce him. There's so many people who have come in after I made some announcements that I want to rehash for everybody. There will be a barstool meeting immediately following the talk. About 7 o'clock, we'll be gathering over at the Flames restaurant, which is directly across the street from the library. It's a no-host event. Please come, talk with us, and meet the students and the alumni and continue the discussion. You're all welcome to come. The other announcement that I want to make is to let you know that this event is also brought to you by our donors. In particular, we have to thank the Corrette Foundation for their donation that has helped us sustain a lecture series that brings people from all over the United States. So, with no further ado, I'd like Warren Gibson to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. So our speaker today is T.J. Rodgers, founder and CEO of Cypress Semiconductor. Now, Cypress, I believe, does not manufacture consumer products, but chances are their products played a key role in many of your electronic devices. The most astonishing of their products, I think, is their programmable system on a chip, which on a single chip can integrate a number of devices that formerly would have had to been put together on a board and custom software written. All that now has shrunk down to a single chip and a software interface, and so the productivity of designers is greatly enhanced by this product. And we consumers are the main beneficiaries in the end of these revolutionary advances, and we don't even know anything about it, most of us. And of course, along the way, the employees get their paycheck and their pride of accomplishment, and stockholders, if all goes well, get their earnings. And TJ must be in a relaxed mood today because the Rantron acquisition has gone through, if I'm not mistaken. Now, T.J. Rodgers and I have a couple of things in common. I also have a Ph.D. in engineering. I also started a Silicon Valley company in November of '82. But whereas our company grew to 20 million by the time I retired, Cypress did just shy of $1 billion last year and is going strong. Now, T.J. Rodgers is an exception among corporate CEOs, most of whom are afraid of their shadows, who lurk behind the skirts of their PR people and their lawyers and their handlers, but I think it's safe to say that nobody handles T.J. Rodgers. Maybe his wife, I don't know. So, whether you agree with his opinions or not, I think we all have to admire his courage in speaking out on the things he believes. TJ's topic this evening is the 1%. He'll speak for about an hour, and then we'll have Q&A, and as Lydia said, we'll adjourn to Flames after that. So please help me welcome Dr. T.J. Rodgers.
Look at that, it worked. Well, I saw the title. It's kind of interesting. It's a provocative lecture series. I guess that means I'm supposed to provoke you, which is okay because I'm actually pretty good at provoking people. That's one of my specialties. I put together some things today that you might call a contrarian. Some things I talk about that you might call contrarian. That is, they're counter to conventional wisdom, conventional belief structures. The one that sort of started it out is the one I'll show first. This is something I showed at our annual meeting. So in this meeting, it's a SEC required meeting. Shareholders can come. In today's world, there is no vote anymore. All the votes are done by proxy. If there's any contentious issue, proxy solicitation firms have talked to the largest shareholders, and you've either won or lost by the time it's there. So the meeting is more or less a relic of the past, where the idea is shareholders come in and vote. The fact is the vote's over before the meeting starts, and the idea is, in many companies, is to say something nice and then get out of Dodge. I typically take the trouble to invite our employees so they can see what I'm saying to shareholders. We do it on the web so that our shareholders in New York and other big investment centers can see it, and then I try to do something substantive, and it's every talk I ever give in my life, I prepare the remarks myself, and I'm speaking for myself, which of course freaks out the board, because the board is a lot like what you heard earlier, very worried about what lawyers have to say, don't say anything controversial, etc. So this is not, to me, extremely controversial, but this is the slide for our annual shareholders meeting, which happened on May 11th. I started out by talking about the cover of our annual report. I am truly a dinosaur in that we put out a paper annual report and we mail it to shareholders, and I write the president's letter word for word, and I edit it something like 15 times before it goes out. And I choose the graphic for the cover. So this is a 2011 annual report, and up here it shows millions of units shipped, and it is history going back to 1984. Cypress was founded in 1982. I was one of the 6 founders of Cypress. And this basically says then that our static random access memory, or SRAM group, has shipped 2.75 billion units over time. USB, so this would be in commercial devices, over 1 billion. And we were celebrating with this cover the shipping of PSOC, which is 1 billion units. It turns out we are now in consumer. This PSOC chip, if you have a BlackBerry or an HTC phone, in the program state, it's a microcontroller, but in a program state, is the cell phone, is the touchscreen controller. So we are, and also the static RAMs, the place they're used most, our largest static RAM customer is Cisco. So if you do an email, it is almost undoubtedly true that your bits of your email will go through one of our static RAMs. I think you all know USB. So I was talking to shareholders, and I was talking about share price gain, and this is a 5-year look at share price gain, and it's normalized to 100%. That means that in May of 2007, 5 years before the time of this talk, everything was 0%. It had neither gained nor appreciated, and I'm comparing Cypress, our company, the NASDAQ composite average, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, basically the big ones on the New York Stock Exchange, and the SOX. SOX is the Semiconductor Index, and I'm bragging. Now, I should tell you that since this time, our stock has dropped from about that point down to about that point, so we've had some losses in the recent time. But even then, the point is that I'm making to shareholders is that investing in us, you made more money than putting it in these safe, more subdued investments. And by the way, the thing you should note here is that's 0, and that's 07, and that's 12. So basically, if you invested in the Dow Jones stock averages, you made nothing in 5 years. You lost money in the average semiconductor company a little bit, and you made a little bit of money in NASDAQ, and I'm bragging about us. Now that sets you up so that you have credibility, then you can say what you really want to say, and that'll come up in a little while. I then made a comparison, same graph, same 300%, same 5-year rolling period. And I got rid of the standard indices, and I put in 2 other ones. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, exactly at 0, and Berkshire Hathaway, 2.7%. Who knows Berkshire Hathaway? It is the Warren Buffett's company, right. So he's Forbes came out today, he's the 2nd richest man in America. He's worth $46 billion, yada, yada, yada. I'm a millibillionaire. And I made the point that Berkshire Hathaway hadn't done all that well. They had done just barely better than putting your money in some sort of average. So the seer of Omaha, as he's called, for all of his fame, and he's made personally a lot of money, the fact is if you look at the last 5 years, he hadn't made very much money for his shareholders. And then I took off in a riff on Warren Buffett. So I'm now going to, like I said, provocative. If you're a Warren Buffett fan, you won't like the next few minutes. I talked about Warren Buffett on ABC television in 2012. He talked about his secretary, Debbie Bozenek. Control A, arrow stays on. He paid 17.4% tax on whatever he made, which is probably millions, and she paid 35.8% tax. Now, people argued that this was some sort of distortion because they looked at what she earned, and what she could earn in her position was such that if she paid more than 7.7% tax, something was wrong. But leaving that alone, leaving the fact that his statements were challenged on a factual basis, just let's say she did pay 35.8. So then he said, and you've heard this, the Buffett tax, we ought to have a quote-unquote fair tax on the mega-rich, like Warren, for example. He said, I shouldn't be paying 17.4% while she's paying 35.8. Of course, he failed to mention that his tax rate is that of capital gains, and her tax rate is that of income. And his income, the salary, for example, was surely taxed at a 50% rate, but he made most of his money apparently on capital gains. And in America, of course, there is not only America, but all industrialized countries, there is a lower tax on capital gains, meaning if you invest in a company or invest in stock and then make money on it, you pay in the U.S. 15% tax. And if you make money just by earning money, then income, for example, then you pay a 36% federal tax and 50% rough cut if you live in the state of California. So that's the way things are. That's the way they should be. Any country that would raise the tax rate on capital gains to 35.8% would soon be looking a lot like Greece. He kind of glosses that over. Here's some facts. The top 1%. I'm a member of the top 1%. I'm proud of being in the top 1%. Thank you. I worked my ass off to be in the 1%. My mother was a fifth grade school teacher in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. My dad was a car salesman. And I came to California, the land of promise. I started a company, and as you heard, it's approximately $1 billion company. I would like to tell you something. In my day, when I was in college, at your age, the top 1%, those were the people that were successful people, and we tried to do that ourselves later in our life. Now the top 1% is people talk about it with scorn. It's amazing, the class warfare going on against our successful people. By the way, I don't know if you know it, but the top 1% earns 20% of all income. So 1% of the people in this country earn 20% of the income. That's unfair is the wrong word. That is disproportionate. They earn 20 times more income than average. The top 1% also pays 40% of all taxes. So 1% of the people pay almost half of the taxes paid in the United States. That, by the way, is up from 20% in 1980. So the tax rate on the top 1% has been going up. They used to earn 20% of the income and pay 20% of the taxes. They now earn 20% of the income and pay 40% of the taxes. The top 1% pays more taxes as a group than the bottom 90% does added together. These are facts from the IRS. You can check them on the net. And the bottom 50% pays no taxes in the U.S. on average. Okay, so when we talk about the mega rich and paying a fair tax, my first reaction is that 1% of the people paying 40% of the taxes is very fair, if anything disproportionate. Meanwhile, I just put out a fact. The IRS sued NetJet, which is a Warren Buffett company, has sued NetJet for $366 million for tax evasion. Yeah, okay. So Warren, can make it either way. And by the way, Berkshire Hathaway firms received $95 billion in TARP money, Troubled Asset Relief Program. So basically the government dole back to the banks that managed themselves into trouble and then got bailed out. And his firm got bailed out. So while he's being sued for not paying his taxes, and he's gotten $95 billion in corporate welfare, he then complains about how much his taxes the secretary pays. So to me, this is hypocritical, this dialogue, relative to what the man really does. And then he proposed a Buffett rule, a 30% alternative minimum tax, meaning that no matter what your tax is, you pay 30%. Therefore, if you lost money in the year, you still pay taxes anyway, on top of your loss. So I put the word government down here, and I wondered how the government would compare to Berkshire Hathaway or Dow Jones Industrial Average. And the fact is, this is a group of the biggest and oldest, and some would say stodgiest companies in America. But the performance of our government in terms of what they deliver per dollar spent when they have no profit motive is going to be less productive in terms of what is delivered per percent per dollar spent than these two indices. I assert that. And then I looked at my own investments. What I own. I don't live lavishly. I don't have a private airplane like Warren does. The fact is, I could have a private airplane, but one flight in a private airplane to Green Bay, where I go 8 times a year to see a football game with my team, because I'm from Wisconsin, costs $50,000, and I can provide a meal for a hungry person for $4. And somehow just that kind of rings my bell as something I don't want to do. So my money, my point is, I don't use it to live lavishly. I have one house. I have two, actually. My mother died in Wisconsin, and I own her house in Wisconsin, and I have my home in California. So my money is not used to support my lifestyle. I'm not Larry Ellison. My money is used to be invested, because that's what you do with money. You put it in the bank, and then you realize you're not getting anything in the bank, and then you say, well, I'll invest it in stock, or I'll invest it in this or that. So first of all, when we talk about taxing the top 1%, what we're really saying is not we're taking money away from them for their private airplanes and whatever. They will have those things no matter what. It's saying we will take money that the top 1% has invested, and we will give it to the government. That is the transaction that will happen. So I'm looking at what transaction would happen here if I get taxed more. I own 8.2 million shares of Cypress, so I invest in my own company. I own shares of SunPower. SunPower is the largest solar company in the world. SunPower was a company that was, in effect, founded by Cypress. It was an old, small startup, but we turned it from a company that was right on the edge of bankruptcy into a multi-billion-dollar solar company. I'll talk about that later, and I still hold shares in that. I own shares in a company called SolarBridge in Austin, Texas, which makes inverters, the things that turn solar energy into energy you can use in your house, direct current to alternating current. I think they have a better mousetrap. I own shares in a company called Bloom Energy, and I'm on the board there. They make fuel cells. This company, who knows of SunPower? A few of you. SunPower, FYI, is the largest solar company in the world. And it's right here in Silicon Valley. I used to be on the board. I've since retired. I started with them in 2000. Bloom Energy is the next mega IPO. When next time you hear about Bloom Energy, you will be reading about it in the San Jose Mercury News. They will be talking about Bloom going public. Bloom Energy uses fuel cells which convert natural gas or methane directly into electricity at an extraordinarily efficient rate, more efficient than large power plants. It is Bloom Energy's system is to large power plants as cell phones are to large central telephone stations. Power in the future will be generated by little boxes, and the boxes are, think about 6 of these side by side. They will they'll hook up to a normal gas line, and electricity will come out, and they will power a neighborhood. So no more will we have large lines like we have telephone lines. We will no longer have large power lines. They won't be needed, and Bloom Energy will change the paradigm, I believe, of how power works. I invested in Google. I invest in Intel because I'm a Silicon guy, and I think they're an extraordinarily good company. I then invest, people talk about giving back. I give back to Silicon Valley in a way that I think is more effective than other ways of giving back. I invest in venture funds. So I invest in Kleiner Perkins, and I've invested in their funds 2 through 14, Sequoia Fund, 7 rows in benchmark and crosslink. Now it turns out these top 3 are three of the venture funds that funded my own company. So they gave me money to achieve my dream in 1982. And they stayed with me for 3 years through $40 million of investment until we started making money, and I'll show you that graph later, and got on our own. So I give money back to them so they can reinvest back in Silicon Valley, and they can start other startups to do other technologies. In return for allowing me to invest in their funds, because typically only the big guys get into, I'm talking real big, Harvard Endowment Fund. Only the big guys get into these funds, but they let me in for a smaller amount of money. The quid pro quo for that is they use me technically. So they call me up and say, for example, we got this company called Bloom Energy. They make fuel cells, and they say they're going to revolutionize. This is 2000. They think they're going to revolutionize the way energy is made. We would like you to interview the founders and listen to their technology and give us your opinion, since you understand this stuff and we don't, about whether or not it's going to work. So I do technical stuff for them, and then I go on the boards of some of their companies. So I've been on the boards of 10-ish technology companies. So that's the way I use my skill and my experience to give back to create economic activity and jobs in Silicon Valley. And finally, I've got a bunch of money in a thing called a donor-advised fund. A donor-advised fund is, in effect, a charity that you don't know who you're giving to in advance. So there are 2 donor-advised funds in Silicon Valley. So let's, for example, I give money, which I have, to the Second Harvest Food Bank, which is food for the poor in Silicon Valley. If I give $100 to them or $1,000, then that comes off my income. That is, what the government says is if you want to take your income and give $1,000 to charity, we will only tax you. Let's say I make $10,000. If you want to give $1,000 to charity, we'll only tax you on the $9,000 that's left. Those are the rules for taxes on charity. And therefore, you don't give taxed dollars to charity. You give untaxed dollars to charity. A donor-advised fund is a fund where if you want to give money to charity, but you don't know exactly which one, or you want to give it out over time, or you want to give it out according to certain conditions. When you guys do this, you'll get $10,000. When you do that, you'll get another $10,000. Then you give your money to a donor-advised fund. They're totally independent, and once the money goes in, who's electrical engineering in here? Okay, I can't use my analogy. It's the diode. The diodes, things go one way through the diode, and they never come back. So you give your money to the donor-advised fund, and it's gone. And they own your money, not you. And the only way they can disperse your money is if you tell them to give it to a charity, and they check out the charity, which is a law for them, and the charity is an acceptable charity to the government. That is, it's an official 501c3 charity, tax code charity. So that's money I give to charity. And my favorite charity, I have one that's overwhelming to me is the Second Harvest Food Bank. To me, to be in this environment with all the richness around us and have people worried about food is crazy. So that's where my investments are. I don't fly it. You can't drink 40 bottles of Chateau Lafite Rothschild for dinner every night. I don't drink it. I don't eat it. When I travel on United Airlines. I've traveled so much that I buy a coach ticket and I wave my black card at them, and then they upgrade me to business class, and business class is close enough, so I fly business class instead of first class. So I would say 99.x% of the money I've ever earned is there. So when you talk about the mega rich, and I'm, like I said, I'm a mega rich guy. When you talk about the mega rich, but I'm in the group he's talking about, and you talk about a quote-unquote fair tax for them, what you're talking about doing is increasing my tax rate, which is currently a little over 50% of what I make goes to the government, increasing my tax rate, which means money won't go to that list right there. What does it go into? The taxes will go into the government. And what are government programs? Instead of Bloom Energy or venture funds to create more startup, we will do shovel-ready projects. We can talk about shovel-ready projects, meaning if you got some boondoggle ready to go and the government needs to quote-unquote stimulate the economy, then it'll go into that, and we see them all over the place. And one that I love is Cash for Clunkers. Okay? I just tell you, first of all, don't worry about me. Trust me, I'm going to make out okay. Don't worry about me, but ask yourself if you want not to be on charity, and if you want a job, and you want to make money, and not be poor, would the money, my money, be better invested in this stuff or better invested in that stuff to create wealth and to create a job for you? So when people talk about a taxing the rich fair, what they're talking about is raising the tax rate above 50% for the top 1%, taking more than half the money and moving it into the government. And I claim that's a loser for poor people. Like I said, it won't be a loser for me. I will just own less stock or not own one of those stocks. I won't change my life one bit. And when he blathers about fairness and all that stuff, at the very same time, he's playing tax games with his companies and taking government bailout money way in excess of what he pays in taxes. That really bothers me. So, of course, while I was saying that, my CFO was sitting there with this rub. Of course, I never show these guys in advance because I know they'd try to convince me not to say it. He's rubbing his forehead like that, and the board guys are nudging each other like that. This is a curve. Now, again, I show this to investors. This is lifetime cumulative financing. So this curve goes back to when we founded the company in 1982 and goes out to the May 11th annual report. And it's what we call a cash flow curve. And then it's got some letters on it, and it says venture capital, meaning getting money from a venture capital firm, stock offering, selling stock, initial public offering, stock buyback, where you actually take your stock out of the market and give back money, so the opposite of selling stock. Convertible debenture, you can think about it pretty much as selling stock. It's a fairly complicated thing beyond the scope of what I want to burn my time on here. And these are all indicated. So we started in 12/1/82, so our 30th birthday is coming up. Venture capital 1, 2, 3, and 4. And at that time, we had consumed about $40 million. This is in billions of dollars. So this is $500 million. So the venture capitalists gave us $40 million. We then took money from the market. We took money in an IPO. There's a secondary offering, et cetera. And over the years, we went up and down. The crash of 2000 really clobbered us. The crash of 2003 was even more painful. And at the very bottom, we had taken from the market $0.8 billion. $800 million had been given to us, and that $800 million built a company that was about $1 billion in size. So in order to determine whether or not we were worth it, you'd have to say, is that company worth more than $800 million? Well, the answer was our company is worth about $2 billion. So in effect, you invested $800 million, and the value of the company, all of the stock added together, was $2 billion. So I would argue it was worth it, even at the bottom. But then, I won't go through this. I was bragging about management changes and how we were improving the efficiency of the corporation. We started making cash and profit, hand over fist. And today, we are long $1.9 billion. What does that mean? That means that we have put $1.9 more billion in cash back into the economy than we've taken out. And the company's still there. And the company's still worth about $2.5 billion. So the company, in effect, is free. Nobody paid for it. And the company generated another $1.9 billion in dollars. And SunPower, it turns out we started SunPower, we took it public, and we decided our shareholders wanted SunPower very badly. They didn't want to own SunPower through Cypress. They wanted to own SunPower directly. Another complicated story. But we spun out SunPower. That is, every Cypress shareholder was given some SunPower shares, and we gave our shareholders another $2.6 billion. So you add those two numbers together, the company's free, and you got $2.6 billion in stock and $1.9 billion in cash. That's our record. That, if you want a graph that people talk about creating wealth, that's the graph. Governments can't create wealth. Cash for clunkers does not make money. There's not more money on the earth to be split up by the earth's inhabitants when money goes through the government path. And this creation of wealth, which along with it creates jobs, the jobs create more taxes, is what the private sector is about. And the most successful of the private sector, particularly here in Silicon Valley, there are some big shot CEOs in some companies I don't like at all, but particularly here in Silicon Valley, is about wealth and job creation. You take money away from them. You take money away from the people who create new companies, new ideas, and new jobs, even their excess, quote-unquote, excess money. I'm going to stop there and see if you got a question. Yes.
So you mentioned that you said that the government isn't producing jobs or anything like that if they raise the taxes, which your money would have been invested into different companies. But what about education? If there is more people in education, there are classes being cut at some of the state. If we have more money going to that, students will graduate faster. There might be more startups coming out of there, which is more opportunity for you to invest into these companies that are creating startups who people who couldn't get those educations. So what is your standpoint on that?
Okay, first of all, I didn't say the government can't create jobs. The government certainly can create jobs. Just go to Washington. You'll find a lot of jobs. You'll find a lot of long, black, shiny limos, and the guy who's driving one has a job. The question is, for all the money they spent, do they create as many jobs as the equivalent amount of money that would go, for example, into Silicon Valley or into private enterprise? And the answer, and there's no disagreement on this, the biggest liberal in the world, the biggest left-winger in the world would not argue against these facts, that the efficiency of creation of jobs is much higher in the private sector than in the public sector. You asked the second question about education. To me, education is key. I just also finished a term as a trustee of Dartmouth College, and I just endowed 2 chairs at Dartmouth College. So and by the way, those chairs, endowing a chair means you give several $1 million to the college, they put the money in the bank, interest from the money, then pays the professor, so the professor is employed forever from that money, and when that professor goes away, the next one comes in and he takes that quote-unquote chair, meaning the position that is funded forever. So there will be 2 Rodgers professors in STEM, science, technology, etc., at Dartmouth College forever. So I'm a big believer in, I put my money where my mouth is. But I believe if you look at where the money comes for colleges, it's mostly from the private sector, point one. And if you look at where the big hurt's coming from in colleges right now, it's the government evaporating out, especially in the state schools in California and the universities and state schools in California, the government evaporating out from underneath them, and all of a sudden the burden is being transferred to the students and to the faculty and to the general running of the college. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in education, and I wish the government would treat it better. Any more? I'm going to go on. So now, yes?
Yes, I have a question about the bloom energy that you were talking about earlier.
Sure.
How long before it would need an overhaul, like the longevity of the fuel cell, before it would need to be?
How long do they, before they have to refurbish or overhaul the system? Bloom Energy system, when you buy it, is guaranteed for 10 years, meaning any overhauls that have to be done are part of the price. So in effect, you have to pay for it. To answer your question on a technical level, today, during the 10-year period, they have to refurbish the system twice. And in an analogy to a car, it's like they have to change out the pistons and the crankshaft. It's a major refurbishment. But that's in the cost. Okay, yes.
Bloom Energy, you said, was through methane or through natural gases?
Yes.
Is that American company or where is it?
Right here in Silicon Valley, Kleiner Perkins. It's kind of a mega startup. The investors have invested well over $1 billion in Bloom Energy. Incredibly, it's a classic Silicon Valley startup. It's run by a Ph.D. who's very technical. He's from India, Mumbai. So there's also the Indian infusion into our culture and into our businesses. They make a special kind of fuel cell called a solid oxide fuel cell, and it's more efficient turning methane into electricity than a mega $100 million generator from Siemens or General Electric that you'd put in a power plant and put it on the ocean and cool it. The domes that you can think of. Trust me, it's going to be a big deal, and it is really going to change the world. Okay, Dealing with the devil. Will green save the economy? I gave this talk at a convention of green venture capitalists. So they're all there in San Diego talking about investing in green and how wonderful it is. And I came in and spoke contrarian to that belief. So this is the one, if it's going to be provocative in this crowd, this is the one that will provoke you. And will green save the economy? Will green save the planet? And I pointed out in the beginning that I have a conflict of interest. I'm a shareholder in SunPower Corporation, Cypress Envirosystems. We have a small energy company, and a company called Bloom Energy I talked about. Energy mandates and subsidies benefit me personally. So right now, green is in, and the government is throwing money at green, Solyndra, and I get money from that. And I'm actually going to talk about that conflict of interest. My recommendations, first of all, one of the pillars of green is global warming. We have it. The Earth's getting warmer. That's bad for a bunch of reasons. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows, but I am a global warming skeptic, and I certainly am highly suspicious of the claims made by the global warming community. And I'll talk about that. Second point, if you're going to, again, this is a presentation to venture capitalists, what to invest in and what not. By the way, green has been a disaster investment for venture capitalists, an absolute sinkhole of money that will never come back. Do not rely for long on government funding. If you build a company that relies on the government, you will build a company that can't stand on its own, and eventually the company will fail. Huh? Tesla? No, I don't think Tesla's going to fail. I think Tesla's, my CFO's on the board of Tesla. However, Tesla may run into some big trouble if they don't quickly get off of the government dole. For example, the reason I quit SunPower, I'm an engineer. I go into the meeting. They used to be small. The engineers come in. We made a solar cell. We got our efficiency from 22.3 to 22.8%. We did this with the diffusion. We did that with the passivation. But your yield is still only 85%. We're working on yield. We understand we got a problem. We're going to do A, B, and C to improve yield. Then we come in and we talk about selling the stuff, making panels with it, and we would talk about implementing and creating solar energy panels that people could use in their house. In SunPower, there is no controversy, makes the best solar energy solution in the world. Their competitive disadvantage is their costs are higher than those in China. The day I realized I was no longer going to be on the SunPower board, the day I realized I was wasting my time, the vice president of government relations came in. She has a department of 60. I couldn't go to SunPower, which, by the way, SunPower was in Building 3. I'm in Building 6 at Cypress. SunPower, we gave Building 3. I couldn't walk across the street to Building 3 so I could save time and, hassle the engineers about doing a better job, which is what I do for a living. I had to drive to Richmond, California, where SunPower, during the peak, when its stock was 160, more later to come, bought an old Ford plant, a 1924 vintage Ford plant on the water in San Francisco Bay, refurbished it. It has better fittings than I do in my house, okay, and marble, etc. And I went to their conference room, which is frosted glass with SunPower logos in it, looking out over the top of the frosting onto San Francisco Bay, and I listened for 2 hours to the Vice President of Government Affairs tell us why her department of 60 people wasn't enough, and if we really wanted to succeed as a solar company, we needed more government people. And that, literally, I'll never forget that day. That was the day my head clicked and I said, I'm out of here, and I left. Demand standalone economic viability for a company. To investors, again, I'm speaking. Do it the old-fashioned way. Superior talent, superior technology, relentless drive based on self-interest. Self-interest, to me, is a good thing, not a bad thing. When the founders of a company are worried about making the score, buying their house, going public, they will produce results very much better than my company, where I've got people that are kind of working, and that's why we have startups all the time at Cypress, because I like to harness that energy. Do it the very old-fashioned way. Believe in free markets. And by free markets, I mean real, true free markets, not necessarily the form of government-influenced capitalism we have in the United States today. I mean free markets. Believe in the Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech, the ownership of private property, and limited government. These last two, of course, is where the environmental, actually all three. If you listen to Al Gore, I don't have a right to make this speech because it's long been concluded the science is incontrovertible that there is global warming. I don't believe that, but he said that anybody that says that's got a problem. They don't get it. Private property ownership. You own that property. You can do whatever you want with it, but it's a wetland, so you can't build on it, you can't walk on it, etc. And limited government. Of course, again, this is where the government encroaches on us, not by taking our money necessarily, but by creating rules and regulations that change the way we live. Run like hell when you hear any of the following. This is, again, to investors. Green jobs, green economy. And by the way, I gave this talk a year and a half ago, and I was dead right for the next 18 months. Government-industry partnerships, carbon tax, and double bottom line. You have two bottom lines, right? One's the profit bottom line. The other one is doing good for the world bottom line. You have to have a double bottom line. I said run like hell. Now, this may seem like money grubbing, profit before this and that, but I would argue to you, if you read any of the works of Ayn Rand, for example, and if you just look at the economics I told you before, if you run the company to be a company to make a profit, which is to make things people want more cheaply than what they're willing to pay, and to create that money to put back into your company, to grow your company, and to hire more people and grow some more, that is health that will do better for poor people than anything you can do with a double bottom line. Today, one of the things we do, just to take us a sideline for a minute, we just donated a $9 million building to Second Harvest Food Bank. So we've been on the green economy economic stimulus mode now for 4 years of the current administration, and an economic disaster 8 years before that. The Bush administration was equally as bad economically, in my opinion, as the Obama administration has been, and after 12 years, we now have twice as many hungry people in Silicon Valley as we had before. So if we had a bunch of companies and a bunch of rich guys driving around, or rich people driving around in Ferraris, more Google millionaires, more Facebook millionaires, if we had more of that here and less government intervention, there would be fewer hungry people. They've doubled. 1 out of every 6 people in Santa Clara County and San Mateo County asked for food sometime last year. And that's where my money goes. Food's first, then we'll talk about other stuff. This is a picture of me in 1991, and I was in the cover of Business Week magazine, and I was labeled the bad boy of Silicon Valley. The reason I was that I gave a speech, actually multiple speeches like this one, which were very contrarian at the time, where I said corporate welfare was bad, giving money to corporations was bad. My mother was a school teacher in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and taking money away from my mother and giving it to General Electric or Intel was wrong and bad, and corporate welfare should go away. And also corporate welfare was actually harmful to the industries that it supposedly was helping. That made me, to me it's obvious. The math is obvious, but that made me the bad boy of Silicon Valley. So I've now talked about the government in pejorative terms, in terms of taking and controlling money. I just talked about corporate welfare, which partly involves the government, but also involves companies on the dole. And I'll name Archer Daniels Midland as sort of the ultimate welfare queen of all companies. And I'm against that. So you got to say, well, God, talking about government being bad, he must be a Republican, hardcore. God, talking about companies being bad, he must be a Democrat, hardcore. The answer is neither of the above. I'm about freedom. I'm a libertarian. And I dislike, when it comes to social issues, women's rights, etc., I'm a liberal Democrat. And when it comes to economic issues, I'm a non-Bush, real old-fashioned conservative, small government, Reagan Republican. Thank you. The bad boy opposed Semitech, a subsidy to the semiconductor industry. So the real reason I was called bad boy was I went up there and said, you guys are about to give money to chip companies. Don't do it. It's bad. And I run a chip company. And the senators that I was talking, I actually testified in Congress 5 times against corporate welfare, and they would sit there and their jaws would drop. Because they'd invite me in. I'm a chip company guy. Everybody'd expect I'd get up and talk about, give me money because I'll create jobs and do good, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't. I walked up and said, don't give me any money. You will hurt my company. You will hurt our industry. Just go away and leave us alone. And jaws dropped. And by the way, again, I told you in the beginning, we do get money coming in, not to us, but to our customers. on solar. Actually, I don't own the solar anymore. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go away, and I'm going to deal with that philosophical problem later in my interaction with Milton Friedman on that. This is Senate testimony. Senate Committee on Governmental Affairs, Declaration of Independence and Corporate Welfare. The fifth time I testified, they knew I was coming. They knew I wasn't going to say what they wanted. Senator Leahy from the state of IBM, also known as Vermont, knew that I was going to say bad stuff. So some people I knew in Washington called me up and said, these guys are going to do you in. They were already portraying you as a nutcake. And they're going to bring in 5 CEOs going to say, give me money, it's good for America to give me money, and then you're going to get up and say no, and they're going to marginalize you. So that was like 2 days before I flew to Washington, and I had to figure out how to combat that because I was all alone. I don't have an entourage. I don't have a government affairs department. Francis, the woman that's here before that actually, this is the first time I've ever had somebody set up a computer because I knew it was going to be at the last minute, and I didn't want to be fumbling with the computer. I usually set up my own computer. I just don't have any of that stuff. I testified against corporate welfare, and what I did was I went and got the signatures of Scott McNeely of Sun. I went and got the signatures of the CEOs in Silicon Valley who tend to be libertarian and tend to say, I don't want money, and they all signed up to this. The high taxes that our company and its employees pay to support the current local, state, federal government tax burden of 35% of GDP, it's up above that now, hurts our economy more than any possible corporate benefit from government spending. If an independent commission, similar to the military base closing commission, identified a fair and substantial government spending cut in the area of so-called corporate welfare, I would support that cut even if it meant funding cuts to my own company. Pretty amazing. So your CEOs here are a different breed than the typical CEO, and the guy that hides behind the lawyers and all that stuff, man, you're talking about East Coast all the way. I one time wrote an article, just what I said to you, taxing more from people that have money will remove money from the most vigorous part of the economy and hurt poor people more than it helps. And I published that in the Wall Street Journal. And I got this letter, which I'm very proud of. It came from the Hoover Institution at Stanford. It's signed by Milton Friedman, senior research fellow. Dear TJ, I never met him. This letter came in cold. Dear TJ, I've been meaning for some days to congratulate you on your absolutely splendid article in the Wall Street Journal. If we only had a few more people like you with the courage to speak out and to express their views plainly without equivocation. Because you are so few, we value you all the more highly. Congratulations. A day later, my secretary says to me, Milton Friedman's on the phone. And I'm going, I said, does he have Sir Walter Raleigh in a can? It's some joke. And she says, I really think it's Milton Friedman. So I pick it up, and he congratulated me. And I got to know him, and he became an informal advisor of mine. And sometimes when I was going to Washington or I was going to give a talk, I'd talk to him, and I'll show you something he did later. Actually, I'll show it to you right now. I had a problem where I was being attacked by the other guy saying Rodgers is a hypocrite, same way I attacked Buffett today. Rodgers is a hypocrite. He's got a company, a small company. It's called Silicon Light Machines, and they had a contract with the government. They were selling optical instruments to the government. So it wasn't welfare, but the government, one of the branches, was a customer of ours. And the other guy said, Rodgers is a hypocrite. He takes money from a company called Silicon Light Machines, which, of course, he buries and doesn't call Cypress, so he doesn't have to take credit for it. Now, this was a few $100,000 non-event, and it was a sale, not welfare. But, they were attacking me, so I called up Milton Friedman. And one thing, Friedman had an IQ that was off the charts, and he was a teacher, and he was very good. And whenever you talk to Milton Friedman, you walk in kind of woolly, fuzzy-headed. What am I going to do? How does this work? What does M1 mean? Whatever. And Milton Friedman would go Socratic, and he'd ask you a question, then he'd answer the question. He'd ask you 5 or 6 questions. He'd walk you through a list of questions. All of a sudden, ding, that was it. It was clear. And here's the one we went through on the idea of can you take money from the government? Milton, do you believe in a flat tax? Yes. Why? It removes the deduction game, the government's meddling in personal choices, and eliminates billions of dollars of tax preparation and overhead. Good then. Of course, you're not going to take any deductions on your income tax this year, correct? No. Why? Because the 18% flat tax rate is not passed yet, and I would pay about 55% of my income without deductions. So, you will take every deduction legally available to you under the current law, even as you argue that a flat tax is better for the country. Yes. So why would you do any less for your shareholders? Ding. You represent your shareholders. Get everything they're entitled to and still argue for an end to government subsidies. So that's what we did. Do not rely for long on government funding. That is not a stable place to be. A second reason I left SunPower was I wrote this editorial in the Wall Street Journal. And this was, I think, 2010. I don't know what the date is. But this was when Prop 23, which was a carbon tax in California, passed. And I wrote an op-ed against it. And I basically said, we produce very little carbon. We could cut our carbon in half, and it would make no difference in the carbon concentration in the atmosphere. No one, even the biggest global warming person, could tell you that anything would happen about the change in temperature in the Earth based on us decimating our economy. And we will decimate our economy by basically using the creation of energy, taxing the creation of energy in the state. Turns out I got a call from every other member of the SunPower board. How could you do that? Well, you take your pencil and you kind of write on the paper, and and the deal was, of course, they're all the other kind. They're all, it's good because we get pork from the government. You are arguing against pork for your company, SunPower. How could you do that? And that's the other reason, that and the other meeting, which was right after this, that caused me to leave SunPower. Run like hell, carbon tax. This is the headquarters building of our building at Cypress. In 2000, I was one of the first to put solar cells on the building. It produces 350,000 watts peak during the middle of the day. And if you look at the kilowatt hours, the energy consumption, it produces 33% of what we use, and the return on investment was 7 years. Well, that's behind us. So I'm now getting free power from a fully paid for, fully depreciated roof. So as a customer, I saw the benefit of solar energy a long time ago. That's when I ran into this guy. We went to Stanford together. We're in the same Ph.D. program. He's the founder of SunPower. He's a Ph.D./professor, and let's just say his mastery of the second law of thermodynamics far exceeded his mastery of organizational management. And he was about to lay off all his people before Christmas. Not all, half his people, because he couldn't afford to pay their checks. And that's the other thing. Everybody's going to be warm and kind and everything right up till the day the money runs out, and then you go on the street and you get nothing. I'm not a big fan of Mitt Romney, but the attack on him as being a private equity vulture capitalist is absolutely wrong. How Mitt Romney made his living was he would go to a sick company that was badly run by CEOs who flew around in corporate jets. He would take over the company because the company's about to go bust. He would get rid of the excess baggage. He would get rid of the management team. He would lay off the people the company couldn't afford. He would focus the company down on the business they could make money on. And some years later, like 5, he would put a company, a smaller size but profitable company, back into the market. And his profit came from the fact that the company that went back in the market was worth more than the sick company that he bought. Private equity people, by the way, they are vicious, and they do look at you like body parts. I've talked to him. When Cypress was at $3 a share, I talked to them, and the guy was looking at my arm, and I knew he was going to grind it up and sell it. You don't need that anyway. You're left-handed, right? This one, no problem. So I won't say they're nice guys, but I'll tell you there are more people eating today and more companies and more jobs than there would have been without them. So that's Swanson. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He was also a professor at Stanford. This is one of his early experiments to do solar energy. So the idea was that you'd have one super high-performance solar cell. You would concentrate the sun with a dish on the solar cell, and then you'd get a lot of energy out of that one solar cell. Now, they had a little problem. And it tracked. You had XY tracking. So the solar cell would, the dish would get up and it would follow the sun during the day and it would always stay perpendicular to the sun. Sometimes you had a little problem. For example, the dish would come up, it would look at the sun, cloud would go into the sun, a silver airplane would fly next to the cloud, the sun would shine in the silver airplane, the dish would then go, airplane, there I am, and then follow the airplane into the wilderness while the sun disappeared. Then the solar cell would continue on trying to figure out where the hell it was, and when they finally stopped building them, one had burned, and of course the focus stops, right? The focus, if you're looking at the sun, goes right back into the solar cell. If you're off, the focus goes away from the solar cell and goes down. So this thing was burning like a 6-inch path across the parking lot. They gave that one up. They then made money by selling things to the government. NASA wanted to prove that you could fly an airplane only on solar energy. This is an airplane that's huge. It's 250 feet, and it's got 40 kilowatts of power, 53 horsepower, and the airplane flies. And this airplane actually took off and rose to a height of 96,000 feet under solar energy only and landed under its own power. So they got famous, but they were selling solar cells for 20 times more money per cell than you would pay ever to put on your house. So they were hampered by depending upon the government, where their company was unable to make money at prices you would pay to put on your house. And the problem with that is it's not that it's bad. It's not that bad. I always show this picture because I think it's an amazing feat of engineering. The problem is when you run a company, you make hundreds of decisions. And if all of those decisions are made consistent with the fact you can sell your stuff for 10 times more than the market will pay, then you do that. Your marketing department's bigger than it needs to be. Your manufacturing yields are lower than they need to be. Everything you do across the entire company operates to a lower standard. And once that little subsidy goes away, in this case, extra high price for the solar cells, your company is not able to survive. And that's what happened to him. Now, this is their solar cell. Their claim to fame is there are no wires on the front side, so their solar cell is black. Trust me, optically, if something absorbs light, it should be black, right? And if it's black, then you know all the lights that's hitting it is going in, and what they do is they put the wires on the back. So the anode and cathode, the plus and minus terminals go on the back. The front that looks black, the reason it looks black is that if you take a microscopic look at the front, you see this. This is a etch that delineates the silicon planes in silicon. And I actually worked on this for my Ph.D. I actually made transistors on inverted bumps like that, and I was well aware of this. So this is a special way to make anti-reflective coating. Here's in Germany. Germany is the most solarized country in the world. This is a solar park with 6.3 megawatts of power. This is Nellis Air Force Base. They wanted to have power on base so that they wouldn't be dependent if the grid went down. This is a $100 million project. This is acres. These are huge buildings. And if you go, you find acre after acre. These are the SunPower trackers. They're two-dimensional trackers that sit in the optimal angle and then rotate on one axis only for cost reasons. They're designed to sit on their own feet so you don't have to put posts in the ground, stuff like that. SunPower, I left SunPower in 2008. That's why this graph ends in 2008. Grew to $1.043 billion. This year, SunPower is going to be $2.5 billion, the largest solar company in the world. There are bigger companies in China that make more panels of solar, but they cut prices so badly they don't get any money for it. So in terms of dollars, SunPower is the biggest in the world. This is the price of SunPower stock. When we spun out SunPower, their price was $70. They were in the mode of we can do no wrong, the classic mistake young CEOs make when they have that big success. You know, the $38 IPO, right? What can possibly happen to me? Bug on the windshield, just like that. So they were in this mode, and their market cap, the value of all of the stock of the company is $6 billion. And as of yesterday when I updated this graph, their stock was $475 and their market cap was $0.6 billion. And by the way, SunPower is a really good company. The entire solar industry has gone like this. So it turns out it's not just SunPower that is harmed by subsidies to an industry, it is the industry at large. All this money flowing from governments, plural, not just the U.S. government, into solar caused all kinds of solar plants to get built that shouldn't have been built, Solyndra being one example of it, all over the world, making too much capacity, more than people wanted. And then the Chinese came in, they built gigantic plants, and the stuff was coming out and piling up. And somebody said, how can we get rid of it? And the answer is drop the price. You drop the price until you can sell it all. So they dropped the price, and the price of solar energy went from $6 a watt for the big guys to $8 a watt for you, down to $2 a watt. And no company, no industry in the world can handle a price erosion like that. And that price erosion, this is another version. You talk about the housing crash. This is the solar crash. And this is what happens when a free market, where SunPower should have grown more slowly and more modestly over time. And they can get some solar, for example, it's on a mountain where you don't want to run a wire, and solar is warranted. And then you can get maybe high-end housing. And over time, as your price comes down and you get bigger, you stay in contact with the market. When there's a gold rush initiated by the government, it hurts everybody in the industry. This is my subsidy point. So what happened here? The Germans stopped subsidizing solar energy. The Italians stopped subsidizing solar energy. It turns out the Spanish did too. I didn't update the slide for that. And there were calculations in both countries that I believe showed that $1 invested in solar energy never paid back. And this is for the government. This goes back to the question before, what about the government creating jobs? What they showed is when you invest in solar plants, you create so many jobs. So a CEO of a solar company go, give me 50 trillion lira, and I will build a plant in Milano, and I will employ 8,000 people with high-quality jobs and benefits and yada, yada. What they didn't say was if you took the same amount of money and simply reduced corporate taxes for all companies, you would have created more jobs by making the companies in that country, Italy, more competitive. So both the Spanish calculation was for every job created in the solar industry due to subsidization of the solar industry, 1.8 jobs were lost in the rest of the Spanish economy, and they shut it off. And Spain is not a conservative country. And in Italy, there was another study done that this one is a little bit harder to believe. The first one was a very well-done economic study that said 4.6 jobs were lost in the economy at large for every job created in solar. So that's what happened to solar. Don't rely for long on government funding. Real simple. How did we do? Well, I got in because I thought it was cool. I got out because I saw an industry that needed 60 people to talk to the government, and I know that house of cards is cratering. So, see, I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm a very simple, my Midwestern values work really well in Silicon Valley. I watch the rah-rah, and I don't get caught up in that stuff. So I said, okay, we got SunPower. It's worth $60 a share. Our shareholders want it. Let's give it to them. Congratulations. There you go. So what happened to us is that we put $142 million in SunPower, 52 million shares. We paid $274 each. By the way, it would have put in less than $100 million in SunPower if my board hadn't voted against investing in SunPower 3 times against my strong, screaming recommendation. And we would have bought it even cheaper yet, but that's water under the bridge. We bought the company for $274 a share. We owned about 80% of it. In return, we took $677 million in cash we put in the bank to help Cypress. We gave our shareholders $2.516 billion worth of stock, which, by the way, most of them dumped 1 hour after we gave it to them. Good for them. And the average share price on distribution was $61.38. So if you look at the ROI, the money out divided by the money in, it's $22 made for every dollar invested. I can't tell you how many venture capitalists have come up to me and said, congratulations, for what? You're the only person that's ever made money in green technology. Now, it's not completely true, but it's not far. Last topic, the leading environmental indicators. This is a graph from the Environmental Protection Agency, series of graphs which talk about pollution in the United States. How many think pollution is worse now than it was 10 years ago? How many think pollution is better now than it was 10 years ago? All right, try again. I'm saying, logically, I'm saying how many believe A and how many believe A bar. Okay? A bar plus A equals 1. That means every hand's got to go up for one or the other, right? So how many people believe pollution is worse now than it was 10 years ago? How many believe pollution is better now than it was 10 years ago? Okay, it's about 3 to 1. This is what the Environmental Protection Agency says. First of all, by the way, this is a libertarian organization, so they put their little spin up front. They did a survey of the people, and they asked in 2009, tell me what you're worried about. Okay? So even 3 years ago, Joe Blow may be not real smart, but Joe Blow, on the average, was worried about the right stuff. I'm worried about the economy, I'm worried about my job, and I'm worried about terrorism. And there's global warming right there. Demand standalone economic viability. You're not going to make money with people that don't care. They're not going to write their checks for you if they don't believe, and believe in free markets. The Copenhagen Summit in 2009 was, I'll talk a minute about it, but basically it was a global warming summit. They have one every couple of years. How many have been to Copenhagen? How many know the statue? The Little Mermaid. You go. So one of my favorite walks in the world is to walk on the waterfront in Copenhagen, and she is sitting on a rock 20 feet off the shore. And there's a statue, one of my favorite statues in the world, in the same park, and I like Copenhagen. They changed it. First of all, the environmentalists attending the Copenhagen Summit flew in with 140 private jets, which I don't have, rented 1,200 limos. They consisted of government officials, academics, and the press. Their goal was to limit and tax carbon dioxide, and they failed. We in California succeeded where they failed. Here's what it looks like now. Get it? Don't you understand what this is? That's you. I guess it's a female. She certainly is obese. And she's riding on the back of a third world person of some sort. So you see, that's you. And that's the world that you live on. This is art today, next to Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid. You are not a true believer. I want to talk about one of the original true believers, and I want to talk about the underlying philosophy of this. Then I want to talk a little bit about the science of it. How many know of this book? The premise of the book is what? Because too many people. We're gonna starve. That's what he said. We're going to have massive starvation in the United States by 1979. And at the same time we have massive starvation, we're going to have a boom in fat farm industry as well. So I don't know if you have this book. I actually read this book, and I was at Stanford, and I thought it was a powerful book. Prologue. The battle to feed all humanity is over. In the 1970s and 80s, hundreds of millions of people have starved to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. Our position requires that we take immediate action at home and promote effective action worldwide. And then there's a quote in there, population when unchecked increases in a geometrical ratio, meaning exponentially, really. Subsistence increases only in an arithmetical ratio, linearly. A slight acquaintance with the numbers will show the immensity of the first power in comparison to the second. This is the end of the world, 1798. Well, in 1798, most people had to live on the farm and grow food to stay alive. In the United States, when the United States was founded, about 98% of our population had to farm. And only 2% of the people in America had the luxury you own today, which is not to grow up for food in the dirt, go to school, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be in the government. Only 2% could get away from the farm. That's what was required because our farming was so inefficient. We must have population control at home, hopefully through changes in our value system, to my values, but by compulsion if voluntary methods fail. So those of you who are worried about abortion laws and the government controlling what you can and can't do with your body, you really like this one if you want to have a family. I call this group coercive utopians. They have their beliefs, which is fine, But coercive means they have their beliefs and you'll follow their beliefs, or they will figure out a way to get you to follow it. And that is in direct competition with limited government and belief in our Constitution. This is a story in the book, and I just wanted to read it to you, just what he was like. But life since then had been tense, to say the least. But Pasadena, Caltech this thing is in Caltech, was no longer a pleasant place to work. What the future is going to be like, novel style. And Pasadena had never, in her experience, been a pleasant place to live. She could always picture what smog was doing to Peter and Julia's lungs. She didn't want to go back to carrying a purse full of quarters for the breath-of-life machines. Although the machines that appeared around Washington in the last few years, the 1 minute of oxygen they supplied, was not yet a matter of life and death. Pasadena was another story. There's the future right there, Paul Ehrlich says. Okay, fact. Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, you're not getting contrarian here. I'm showing you EPA data. The amount of lead has gone down 96% in the air. Ozone down 94%. Ozone and second type of ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, volatile organics, etc., all down. The air is infinitely cleaner today than it was when I came to California. Period. Okay? That's a fact. That's what the EPA says. If you believe differently, you're believing in a belief that you can't support with fact. It's almost like a religious belief. Holy Ghost. Prove the Holy Ghost is around? I don't think so. You either believe in the Holy Ghost or you don't believe in the Holy Ghost. But this is irrefutable. And by the way, when I came to California in 1970, the shocker to me was, I came from Wisconsin, the air was clean there. I drove to California. I drove up through Gilroy, and when I hit Gilroy, the air turned brown. Nitrous oxide smog. I drove to Palo Alto. I drove up University Avenue. I went into Stanford, where I was going to go to graduate school, and the air was brown, and it was very depressing to me. I was thinking about breathing that crap. And it was really interesting. I went to Stanford, and I got there in the late fall, and there was a brown smog over all of Palo Alto, and it stayed there for the whole summer. I mean, it was every day. And what was really amazing is that when I went to Stanford, about November, the first rain came in November, and there was a rainstorm in November, and I got up one day, and I went outside my house to go to school, and I looked, and I went, holy shit, there are mountains on the other side of the bay. I had not seen the mountains on the east side of the bay, and I'd been there for months. That's how bad the air was. You know, you were all young enough, not all of you, some of the guys around here, that you don't remember that, but when, I know the air's a lot cleaner today because I had that experience myself. By the way, while the air's gotten cleaner, we burn more coal, we've run more automobile miles, we've run more truck miles, and our GDP has gone up by 114%. And that means on the average, of course the rich 1% take all the money, but that means on the average everybody's salary has gone up by a factor of 2. So we have more economic activity and we're more prosperous, and we weren't poisoning the air, we were actually making things better. Now how about starving? This is the U.S. Department of Agriculture data, and it shows the number of farms, the average farm size, yada, 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 and this underlying thing is the farm share of population. So this goes back to the factoid I gave you earlier. 98% of all people had to farm in 1776 to stay alive. And this gives data from a century from 1900 to 2000. The number of people on farms, the number of people required to farm to feed the rest of us so we can do what we want, has gone from 39% to 1%. Now you'd think if we're running out of food, more and more people would be on the farm, right? Because you can't eat, therefore you better grow more food. So obviously it's a factor of 40 wrong. Yet, even today, you can still hear the same thing. Who's that man? Jerry Brown. So you couldn't be more wrong. Isn't that amazing? Most of the people in this room knew who Paul Ehrlich was. If you want to talk about somebody who understands food, if you want to talk about somebody who's maybe saved 1 billion lives, it's that man right there. His name is Norman Borlaug. Okay, this farming we talk about that's not organic, and they put fertilizer on and all that good stuff. He's the guy that did that to improve the productivity. Part of that 40-to-1 improvement are crops he created that were modified to yield better, For example, he went to Mexico where rust was killing wheat and there were people starving, and he created a new hybridized kind of wheat that was lower and wouldn't bend over and was not subject to rust. And Mexican fields, the yield went up in wheat by a factor of 10. In 1944, when Norman Borlaug arrived in Mexico, the nation was in a grip of a crop failure, and airborne fungus was causing an epidemic of stem rust. Acres once flushed with golden wheat and maize yielded little more than sun-baked sallow weeds. Borlaug left Mexico in 1963 with a harvest 6 times what it was. He has arguably saved more lives than anyone in history, maybe 1 billion. Now, if you really think about the goal is to save lives, not to pollute people to death, and the ultimate goal is a better life, one would think that a balanced view of the world would look at this man as being on the positive side of the ledger, yet most people don't even know who he is. Zero population growth. We're going to have to do it by changing your values to my values, or else something more severe. That's what the book said. This is a graph of fertility rate. Families have 6 kids, 6 to 2. The line at 2.33 is the break-even line. If couples have 2.33 children on average, when this graph was done, and I think this was a 2009 graph, then the world's population will be flat. You know, we're going to populate until there's so many of us we can't have enough food and then we're going to starve in 1979. And it's an interesting thing. It's very clear. This is GDP per capita. So GDP per capita is very close to per capita income. Very close. You can think of it that way and not make a mistake in any conclusion you would draw. So in countries that are poor, where the per capita income in U.S. dollars is below 10,000 or below 5,000, let's say, they have a very high fertility rate, many children. And in more advanced countries, Japan, Switzerland, the U.S. is coming up, I got it as a bill. Basically, once countries get to the point they can feed themselves, then they get to worry about other things for the quality of life other than having enough to eat to stay alive. Then they stop having large families. I have 0 children, and I chose to do that. And I feel bad about it every Thanksgiving, but right after Thanksgiving I feel okay again. There's the USA. U.S. zero population growth rate is a little bit over 2. That's because we have a lower mortality rate. There's the world average. So the world average is coming down. So the idea that we're going to overpopulate to the point we're eventually going to snuff each other out because we can't feed, this data doesn't support that. And there's China, and I took them out because they did coerce people. They did force people not to have children. To me, that's very not okay. The organization that I would call the high priest of global warming is the International Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. They are an organization sponsored by the United Nations, and they're the ones that write reports, and basically their reports is the word of God about global warming, period. And this is a cover of the report. I've read this report completely, and I've read parts of other reports, and I want to show you some graphs and pages out of those reports. Atmospheric carbon dioxide has risen. This graph, that's today, and today in this case is 2007, going back for 10,000 years, and there's a graph of carbon dioxide in parts per million in the atmosphere. Boom. So we've gone up, and if you look more closely at this area right here, there it is. So that's a fact. I'm not disputing that fact. So the carbon dioxide, now this goes back to 1800 or before 1800. In colonial times, it's 280 parts per million. Today it's 380 parts per million. And then the theory is carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Of course, it's a much less potent greenhouse gas than the methane, but water is the big one. And there's way more water in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So if you go in the tropics where there's a huge amount of water in the air, global warming will have no impact because the amount of carbon dioxide and the heating it can do relative to all the water that's already there doesn't matter. Where would you go to see it show up? You go in the Arctic because it's frozen and all the water's out of the air, all the water's on the ground. And everybody knows who's living in a cold climate like I did, and you want to get chapped lips, you know, in the winter when all the water's out of the air and dries you out. So you go up there, and therefore modulation of carbon dioxide is going to make a big difference in heating. It's going to be going from extremely cold to cold because of carbon dioxide. And that's why the most pronounced effects of global warming are on the globe, on the caps, ice caps. So has the temperature gone up. So there's the temperature in 1000 AD up to 2000 AD. Temperature bounces around, and it goes up. Carbon dioxide goes up, temperature goes up. Ergo, the famous hockey stick curve proves that CO2 causes global warming. That conclusion, scientifically, how many of you are engineers or scientists in the room? Okay, you understand causality, right? There's no causality here, none. And it's about as valid in my book, and this is a little bit of an extreme statement, as standing on North First Street, where our plant is, watching cars go by and writing down the last digit of the license plate, and then seeing something happen, somebody gets hit with a car, and looking at the last 3 cars that went by, 0, 0, 0, and concluding that whenever 3 cars go by with 0 on the license plate, somebody's going to get hit. There is no causal relationship, and I'll go into some data with that. But of course, if you're a politician, this can get you elected, this can get you famous. This is every British teen to see Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. Who's seen it? Of course. Who knew who Norman Borlaug was before I told you? The British government will send a copy of Al Gore's film about global warming to every secondary school in the country. Schools must warn of the Gore climate film bias. Schools will have to issue a warning before they show pupils Al Gore's controversial film. And basically, they said that this is a political statement, which everybody has the right to make, and many of the purported facts in the film cannot be proven to be facts. And this was litigated. The schools wanted to show Al Gore's film to every child in Britain. There was a lawsuit, and the government was on the side of Al Gore trying to prove that they should show this and just say this is the fact. And they lost the lawsuit. There were 11 facts in Gore's film that were challenged. And I want to talk about 5 of them. The film claims that melting snows in Mount Kilimanjaro evidence global warming. The government's report was forced to concede that it is not correct. The film suggests that evidence from ice cores proves that rising CO2 causes temperature increases over 650,000 years. The court found that this film was misleading. Over that period, CO2 lagged behind the temperature rises in 800 to 2,000 years. From 800 to 2,000. I'm going to show you that actual curve. That's, to me, if you want to ask for one curve that talks about the flaws in the science behind the global warming theory, it's that curve. And so forth.
5 minutes.
Okay? This is a graph of time before now. This is a graph of temperature, and this is a graph of CO2. Green is CO2, blue is temperature. So what it says is 20,000 years ago, the temperature was 8 degrees centigrade colder than it is now. 130,000 years ago, the temperature was 3 degrees hotter than it is now. And it's oscillating. This is an oscillator for you or engineers. This is a graph of carbon dioxide. Now, at first blush, you'd say, okay, carbon dioxide goes up, temperature goes up. Carbon dioxide goes down, temperature goes down. This graph, by the way, I don't have time to explain it, but this comes from a Russian station in the Antarctic called Vostok. And what they did was they drilled an ice core miles deep, and they looked at the ratio of carbon-16 to carbon-18 in carbon dioxide. By looking at the carbon dioxide trapped in the ice, they could tell how much carbon dioxide existed X thousand years ago, and by looking at the ratio of carbon-16 to carbon-18, they could tell what the temperature was, because carbon-16 and 18 freeze at different rates. Therefore, they're an indicator of the temperature. This is the world's best geological thermometer. Global warming is happening here, in the tip of that arrow. All the things we're talking about is this noisy arrow right here saying up and down, up and down, up and down. This is the global warming discussion. And nobody asks, what was this global warming? They're talking about a little noise, a half a degree centigrade there. Or why was it hotter back there, or there, or there? Why did that happen? The car didn't get invented until the tip of the arrow. How can cars be responsible for something that's been bouncing around 8 times more than it's bouncing around now? To me, this is the question where if you're a scientist and you look at the data, you say, something's got to be different than cars. Here's the one that I think is the single most important point. These are Vostok ice cores, temperatures in blue, carbon dioxide in yellow. Anybody see the problem here? Lagging. The problem is that it started getting warmer, and after it started getting warmer by a lot, then the carbon dioxide started getting higher. Who's ever set a Pepsi out in the sun and made the mistake of opening it? Bam! Carbon dioxide has a solubility that's higher in cold than at hot. And basically, there's a huge amount of carbon dioxide in the ocean, huge amount. And when the oceans heat up, carbon dioxide comes out. And this is where you can't, by the way, the lag is 800 to 2,000 years. You can't say carbon dioxide went up, made the atmosphere hotter 2,000 years before the carbon dioxide went up. You just can't say that. That doesn't make sense. You don't have to be a scientist to understand that. And again, this is the Vostok data. In 1200 AD, we had a warming period. All of the ice in Greenland melted. Danish colonies went to Greenland and they grew crops in Greenland. That's documented. In George Washington's time, we had an ice age. When they had blood in the Soda Valley Forge, it was real. It was really cold then. This is the temperature curve according to the IPCC in 1990. We know where the settlements are. They formed in 986. They went away during 1500 to 1900 because it got so cold, everybody got forced out and went back to being a wasteland. In 1995, the high priest said, here's the little ice age. It got cold, and then this is back in 1600. Again, 1776, there's the U.S., and now it's getting warm. The point is, it always gets warmer after an ice age, right? When the glaciers melt, it gets warmer. That's kind of like what ice ages are about. When they're in, things get warmer. I showed the medieval warming period because they cut this graph off and they didn't show it anymore in the IPCC. And I don't have time. This curve got rid of both the ice age that was colder here and got rid of the medieval warming period that was here. The, quote, scientists, unquote, that created this curve at the University of East Anglia in England decided to normalize, quote, unquote, normalize out the ice age, the little ice age, and the medieval warming period. And this is the hockey stick curve, the one that proves when carbon dioxide goes up, temperature goes up. Remember, that's how I started? And if you look at the curve in 1990 from the very same book from the ICC, there's the medieval warming period, the little ice age, and there's now. And there's the exact same data from the exact same period in 2001. So this is why I'm a skeptic. I'm not sure. By the way, it is getting warmer. I have 41 slides to show you why it is getting warmer. I believe the warmness is due to, literally, we're coming out of an ice age right now. Nobody knows. Nobody can prove it. But I just like to inject a little bit of skepticism. The air's cleaner, and we're not going to all die when the Earth heats up and the Earth is parched and there's no water left. These are not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, TJ. What a great bundle of ideas and opinions you've given us. We're out of time, but join us across the street at Flames at 7 if you can. Thank you.
You're welcome.